It is Dream Day. It is Draft Day. Welcome, everyone. Rod Black with you. Glenn Suter with you. Matt Dunnigan. Chris Schultz. 5 months ago, it was Grey Cup Day. We're back. It's football season again.
I like football,
right? I like that. 2 months away from the regular season beginning, a month away from training camps, and for 48 young men today, it is their dream. They will hear their name today. The top two picks owned by Toronto and Saskatchewan. These are the draft rooms right now. The Argonauts, with the worst record last year, had the #1 pick overall until overnight, when guess what? That much rumored trade did happen. So the Saskatchewan Roughriders will select first overall. They will get the 1st and 8th picks from Toronto. The Argonauts will now get the 2nd and 4th picks. However, there was another deal because the Argos will move up to #3. Chris, are you following along here?
I still am.
It is. There's a lot of numbers here. So Toronto gets the 3rd pick, so 2nd and 3rd to the Argos, 18, 26, 30. We'll be long off the air by the time that happens. A reminder, we are on the air for 2 hours. We have the first 2 rounds covered for you here on TSN. The draft tracker is on tsn.ca, cfl.ca. There's a lot of stuff happening. It's a great day, and perhaps Shamari Williams. I'm not even going to say perhaps. Shamari Williams should be the #1 pick and should go to the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Yeah, you know, he's the top pick in this draft, or the top prospect so far, but it looks like that will be the pick for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. This trade makes a lot of sense to me because this draft is so important to the Toronto Argonauts, Matty. When you think about the fact they've got a lot of picks, but they need to have players on the field that can contribute this year.
Without question, I think Jim Barker's the guy to take control of the reins of the Argonauts, and he's certainly doing that. We saw first move he did was erase all the quarterbacks from the roster, so he's a guy that's not afraid of making bold moves. And Schultz, in this year's draft, he's got 9 choices, and he can make a big, huge foundation and build for the Toronto Argonauts.
Well, you mentioned bold moves. I want to see what the Winnipeg Blue Bombers do. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers not won the Grey Cup in 20 years. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be the mismanagement of the Canadian talent?
Well, the Hamilton Tiger Cats won't pick until the 2nd round. Perhaps they will move up. They've had a lot of #1 and 1st round picks because of what they have done the last couple of seasons. Much improved last year, and they forfeited their 1st round pick by picking Zach Carlson last year in the supplemental draft. So there are only 7 selections in the 1st round, but that pick does move into the 2nd round. Again, we have the first 2 rounds for you this afternoon on TSN. Let's go over to Farhan Lalji now.
Thanks, Rod. Now, I'm not sure who that Vaya guy was, but he was mentioned a lot on that board. Before we get to all the trades and moves, let me introduce our panel. Dwayne Ford, our TSN insider, who knows everything there is to know about this draft. Steph Potasic, former CFLer and McMaster head coach. Steve Samar from St. Mary's, he's out here on a recruiting trip. He was kind enough to drop in, tell us about a few of the prospects. And Dwayne, let's start with you. Shamari Williams, all those guys are moving up and down in the top of the draft because Saskatchewan wants Shamari Williams. Why?
Well, Shamari Williams is one of the guys in this draft, Farhan, who is most ready to play in the Canadian Football League right now. Physically prepared, has great football sense, and a guy who has some versatility and can contribute in a couple of different ways.
Steve, there's been so much more emphasis and preparation on the draft, at least in the last 3 years that we've been covering it here on TSN, and that's really trickled down to your level as well. How much more are teams doing to prep for the draft?
Well, I think it starts with the East-West Bowl, that they get to see the guys in their 3rd year. And then we get a lot of phone calls now. You know, players are of interest right away. And people want to know in the CFL where they are and where they're going.
Steph, one of the reasons so many CIS players are being picked high, 54 of the 58 players at eCamp, and so many of the players in the 1st round are CIS guys, it's because of the prep they're getting right now at the CIS level.
Our programs are really starting to evolve and are very competitive with the NCAA option. Our kids are getting 12 months of the year support in nutrition and hydration and strength and conditioning and speed work. You're seeing it in the eCamp. The records are being broke each and every year. And as you said, last year in the first 2 rounds, 11 CIS athletes, Canadian university products.
A testament to the CIS. They're going to the CFL, and there's 6 players right now that may be headed to the NFL either on mini camps or on contracts. Rod?
All right, thanks, guys. We'll get back to you in a few moments. Still awaiting the #1 pick from the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And to welcome us all, here is the commissioner of the Canadian Football League, Mark Cohon.
Welcome, everyone, to the 2010 CFL Canadian Draft. The draft is a big day for our teams. Our coaches and GMs will tell you Canadian talent is a key to success in the CFL, and landing that talent is what today is all about. In fact, this is a big day for all of us who love the CFL, because the draft is really the unofficial start of the CFL season, with training camps just a month away and the Canada Day kickoff all set for July 1st. So, gentlemen, let's get started.
Well, Saskatchewan, you are on the clock, but I don't think there is a lot of drama there. The drama was the deal that was to be made overnight. There's the draft room, and General Manager Brendan Taman will make it, I'm sure, official shortly, and Shamari Williams will be the #1 pick.
Well, when you take a look at the projected starters for Saskatchewan, think back to last year, Rod. This was a team that was, had a lot of depth in the Canadian talent. In fact, played with more than the minimum requirement of Canadians, so it gives them flexibility. This trade or this pick makes a lot of sense for me because this is a team that last year lost Ray Williams for a good portion of the season due to injury. Mike McCullough stepped in at middle linebacker, and you get a versatile player, Matt, on the defensive side of the football with Shamari Williams. It makes a lot of sense in Gary Echeverry's defense, the way they like to play defense.
Well said, Glenn, because that style of defense, you have to be multidimensional, and it's certainly what Shamari Williams is. But I like Mike McCullough last year, and he needs some help because if this kid could step up and play like he did last year, incredible for the Saskatchewan Roughriders and their depth. And this is why the reason the Riders were in the Grey Cup last year, because they have tremendous Canadian depth, and they're simply going to add to it here today, Schultz.
Well, one of the ways that football has changed, I mean, years and years ago, you had a singular position, and if you were a left defensive end or right defensive end, that was how you were recruited. That is where you were slotted in. Now, depending on the defense, and as time has evolved, the more you can do, the better you can be. So the fact that he has versatility, he can play in space, he can come off the edge, that's modern football. That's the way it is right now. The days of like the one middle linebacker that can only play one middle linebacker, they're long gone. You got to play the will, you got to play the MAC, you got to play everything to be effective and to have a career.
It seems like there's going to be some rotation and some jockeying of their ratio there and how they're going to play, because they lose chicken bag on the defensive end, and we know Shamari Williams can play defensive end, so look for their ratio changer right there as well, and how they're going to employ their Canadians.
Here is a young man who is also a proven winner, coming off a Vanier Cup championship with Queens. He knows his stuff. He's getting a chance now to be the #1 pick overall in the Canadian Football League. What a dream for him.
Well, it is a dream for him, and I think the biggest adjustment for him is when he breaks the defensive huddle and he goes to the line of scrimmage and he sees the offensive tackles and he goes, holy smokes. I never really had something like that I had to get around, get over, get through, go inside somehow. So he will adjust. And if he can become a pass rusher, that will be the singular greatest skill that he can enhance Rider football with.
Currently, Schultz, there's only 2 Canadian linebackers on the roster for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, Aaron Wagner and Mike McCullough. So this makes a lot of sense.
Okay, Shamari Williams, I'm sure patiently awaiting to put on that Saskatchewan Roughrider jersey. We have a couple of potential draft picks in the studio. Joe Appel, Rob Maver standing by. We'll see where they fill in the slots today as the Canadian draft begins on TSN.
Rider pride is unrivaled. From coast to coast, we are the flag bearers of the CFL. Because here, football is more than a game. It's a part of who we are. It's 100 years of history, thousands of stories, and 1 million strong. It's 100 years of Rider pride, and we're just getting started.
Downfield for Fantuz, jump ball, and Fantuz got it, and it's a touchdown. It is caught. Oh, what a catch!
Welcome back to the 2010 CFL Draft. Here's a look at our own Dwayne Ford's top 10 best overall players, and we look at those linemen up at the top. 3 players who may not be in camps right away, but could have long CFL careers down the road after that. The bulk of the positions, you look at a number of wide receivers, linebackers, and a defensive lineman out of Stanford, Brian Bulk, as well. So Dwayne, every time we look at a draft, it's always the linemen that are at the top of the board. NCAA guys, in this case CIS guys. Who jumps out at you among the offensive line in this year's class?
Well, the guy that kind of jumps off the board at you is Joel Reinders from Waterloo, because this is a kid who nobody anticipated coming into the E-Camp that he was going to be an NFL prospect. Yet he was a guy who went out, did very well, particularly in his one-on-ones, great technique, surprising athleticism. This is a guy with a 6'8", 320-pound frame. Suddenly you've got a CIS prospect becoming an NFL prospect. It kind of throws things off for the teams that know they're going to have to back away from those NCAA guys, but now your plan B is gone too.
Yeah, Reinders with a contract with the Cleveland Browns, not just a minicamp contract, but an actual contract to go to training camp. Now, aside from the offensive lineman, Steph, receiver might be the most deep position in this draft. Who do you like amongst the receivers?
Well, I agree with you. It is the deepest class I've seen in a couple of years. I really like the young man from Bishops. Sean Gore is a complete football player. He's physical. He's ready to play right away. He's played slot back, understands the nuances of that position, and that's the harder position to learn. He can play special teams. To Leroy Blue's credit at Bishops, his marquee guys get on the field and contribute on special teams. So he's not a risk that you typically might get from a guy that hasn't played those roles at the CIS level.
And a lot of guys who play special teams typically, or many of them, are linebackers. Linebacker, another strength position in this draft. We know about Shamari Williams. Who else should we look for, Steve?
I really like Corey Greenwood. We tried to recruit him coming out of high school, and he ended up going to Concordia. I mean, he was a fantastic athlete. I mean, when you see his numbers that he put up at the E-Camp, I mean, you're talking about somebody that's NFL numbers, and guess what? He ended up getting a look in an NFL minicamp. I mean, I think right away he's a guy that's going to help on teams, and he's going to be an impact player.
I know Corey Greenwood had hoped to get a shot with the Kansas City Chiefs or elsewhere in the NFL. It didn't work out for him quite yet, but you should have a long CFL career. And we talked about all the picks that the BC Lions tried to acquire in that draft. Their big emphasis, they want to go in the middle of the draft because that's where the depth of this draft will really show, and you can get some great players in the mid-20s. Rod?
All right, thanks, gentlemen. We'll get back to you as this draft progresses today, and here it is, the #1 pick of the 2010 draft. Here's Commissioner Mark Cohon.
Thanks, Rod, and here we go. With the first pick in the 2010 CFL Canadian Draft, the Saskatchewan Roughriders select Shamari Williams, linebacker from Queen's University. Toronto, you are now on the clock.
So there it is, Shamari Williams, Vanier Cup champion, a rush end, slated to likely be a linebacker with Saskatchewan. We'll talk more about that. Look at the numbers at the E-Camp in Toronto. Shamari Williams is in Regina. We're going to get a chance to chat with him in a few moments. Let's go over to Dwayne Ford.
Shamari Williams is a guy that I see projecting in the Canadian Football League, and I believe the Saskatchewan Roughriders and many other CFL people see as a defensive end at the next level. He's about 235 pounds right now, but will probably beef up to about 245 to play on the offensive line. We saw him as a terror getting after the quarterback for the Queens Gales during their run to the Vanier Cup. This is his most natural position, is coming off the edge.
Steph, a lot of comparisons to James Quick Parker, comparisons to Leroy Blue, and it's probably simpler just to keep him out there and let him be a speed guy and have an impact right away.
No question. At the college level, if you ran at him, he was so physical and intense, he blew up the run. If you ran away from him, quick first step and runs everything down. He's the most complete defensive end we have, and he's a good one.
Yeah, he certainly is, and he can do more than just play defense. I mean, he was a linebacker at Houston, had a big impact in his one and only year here. Steve, what about his impact on special teams in the CFL? He'll be asked to do that early.
Absolutely. I mean, every Canadian coming in is expected to be on teams, and I think right away you look at his size, speed, and athleticism, and that's what he's going to bring to the table. I think he's going to be an impact player right away.
Yeah, it certainly appears that way, and this guy is more than just on-field smart, he's off-field smart as well. He graduated early from the University of Houston with a degree in entrepreneurship. He runs his own business called StudentBlitz.com. It's a recruiting service that allows high school athletes to post videos and biographical information. He says he's placed 70% of his clients. Shamari Williams, Rod, making an impact in more ways than one.
Well, what a few months for Queen's University. Shamari Williams, Vanier Cup champion, #1 overall. Toronto Argonauts, you are on the clock. They have the second pick, then the third pick. We'll be back to the 2010 CFL Canadian Draft.
Good morning. My name is George Reed. I had the privilege of playing for the Saskatchewan Roughriders for 13 seasons. I'm proud today, as part of the Roughriders 100th season, to announce our first selection and the first selection overall in the 2010 draft. The Riders' first selection is number 731, Mr. Shamari Williams, defensive end and linebacker from Queen's University.
How about that? getting your name announced by George Reed as well. That's something else. Shamari Williams is the #1 pick for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the #1 pick overall in the CFL. Shamari joins us now along with Brendan Taman, the GM of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I think your smile says it all, Shamari.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to be here. I'm happy to be in Regina, and I'm happy to be a Rough Rider.
My question is for Brendan Taman. Brendan, what was it about Shamari that made the difference for you and really put him over the top for this first pick?
Hey, Glenn. You know, we met as a staff at length over this pick, and you know, we had a need at defensive end, and our defensive personnel, Canadian-wise, was needing to be upgraded depth-wise for sure. And Shamari was just a guy, character-wise and ability-wise, that just was a guy we needed to get, and obviously we made the trade to get him.
Shamari, that stadium was sold out every single game last year. It is a football-crazy province. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm definitely ready for it. I'm ready for training camp right now. You know, I'm just excited to be here, excited to be a Rough Rider, and hopefully the fans embrace me and I can have a great season, or a great few seasons here.
Brandon, back to you. Was there any doubt over the last 48 hours that the deal with Toronto would have been done so you could get Shamari Williams?
You know, Adam was playing games here and there with me, but no, I was pretty confident that we could get it all done. It better have gotten done because Shamari was here yesterday, so I warned him, don't change your mind. But no, we were pretty comfortable as of Friday we were getting it done.
Yeah, that would have been pretty embarrassing if he was there anyway. Shamari, Shamari, Vanier Cup champion. Now you're joining a team with a great culture and a great organization of winning. What's it feel like over the last few months to know what you've done?
Oh man, it's been truly a blessing to be here, you know, to come back to Queens and win a Vanier, and then now being the first pick in the CFL draft. And not too many people get to be the first pick and go to a great organization, and I'm blessed to be able to do that.
Well, we're watching you. Welcome to the Canadian Football League, young man.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shamari. Thank you, Brendan. Saskatchewan Roughriders go back to their draft room. We'll hear from them a little bit later on as well. And now the Toronto Argonauts, Matt Dunnigan, are on the clock. Second pick and third pick.
Yes, and you know, I look at this football team, and it's pick 'em. They can go a bunch of different ways. They need some help in many different areas, and Jim Barker is very open and honest about this.
You know, Matty, I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure on Jim Barker. Maybe it's not fair for all that pressure to be on him like this because of the past history of the Argos. It's not because they've picked poor players, but they've just been a little bit unlucky. Last 2 years, they haven't had a first-round pick, Schultz. Yep. And then when you go back the 3 previous years, their first-rounders went down to the NFL and stuck. So they need players that they can get on the field this year.
You know, on every football team, you have about 10, 15 guys that the coaches depend on, that have a work ethic, that have a desire about them, that will show up every single day. What Coach Barker wants is to create that work ethic, to create that core of guys that he can depend on, because the coaches, Matty, you know this, they want to just hang their hat and say, I know this kid will show up.
And Schultz, you said it there, coaches. This is the first time in a number of years that the coaches are involved in the process with the Toronto Argonauts, and to me this makes complete sense, and it's mind-boggling that they weren't in the past, and maybe that therein lies where the disconnect was with the Argonauts and the talent getting on the football field.
So what kind of games was Adam Reed playing with this? Joe Appel standing here. He's here. Let's find out. Here's the #2 pick overall. Once again, rejoin the commissioner.
With the second pick in the 2010 CFL Canadian Draft, the Toronto Argonauts select Joe Appel, a very big offensive lineman from Washington State University. Toronto, you're still on the clock for the 3rd overall pick.
So the #2 pick overall, Joe Appel from Washington State. Off the chart numbers, Schultz at eCamp.
Well, I tell you, anybody that is 6'8" that can bench press 28 times, that means he is a well-trained athlete. That is not easy to do. He has been in the weight room probably since the beginning of his birth.
Well, he's also eaten all of our lunch here. He's a big guy. He's the #2 pick, Joe Appel. Let's go to Dwayne Ford.
Joe Appel is a guy who is, again, physically capable of stepping in, competing against men. Division I experience at Washington State University. A guy who, from those athletic numbers, offers tremendous potential. And that's one thing the Toronto Argonauts see it. Another, of course, the fact that he is available and is going to be in training camp for them right away.
Now, Steve, I got to ask you this, and I'm a little nervous about asking it because he's right over there and he's a lot bigger than I am. But only 4 collegiate starts. How much of a concern is experience?
NCAA Division I football is the best football at the university level on the planet. The CIS and the other divisions below aspire to be that good, but that is the best. He has played 5 games, but practice every single day at that level, and he is ready to go to the next level. And it's apples and oranges. This young man at E-Camp did enough to show that he can make the jump.
Yeah, physically the numbers were simply off the charts. The biggest adjustment an offensive lineman, particularly a tackle, has to make, Steve, is that extra yard. How big of an adjustment is that for a guy like Joe?
Well, I think it really is a big adjustment. I mean, you get a wide rushing ends in the CFL. In the NCAA, you're playing against bigger defensive ends. In the CFL, you have smaller ends. His biggest thing is once he learns to kick slide and get back there and get his hands on you, well, once he does that, it's going to be over.
Talk about his performance, Dwayne, at E-Camp and how that impacted his draft stock here.
Well, the big thing is he really helped himself in terms of the physical testing, and we heard Schultze talk about those numbers, and you do what's called the eyeball test, and Joe Appel is one of those guys you look at, and he's a phenom. This is a 310-pound man who has abs, like Matt Dunnigan. But, but Joe Appel struggled a little bit in terms of those one-on-ones, and you talk about the adjustment, not used to guys being a yard off. Also played high school football in the province of BC, where they play American rules. So the E-Camp was really the first time Joe had to deal with defensive ends, smaller, quicker guys who were a yard off. That's something that's going to take time to adjust to.
Now, he became very good friends in the offseason training with Shamari Williams. He said the one guy he wouldn't mind being drafted behind was Williams. Those two are going to go at it plenty of times here in the CFL. Rod?
Yeah, speaking of Shamari, there it is, number 99. Shamari Williams getting it from the legend, George Reed, the #1 pick. Joe Appel goes #2, and we'll chat with Joe when we come back.
Offensive lineman from Washington State.
And there is that Argo jersey. How does it feel, Joe Appel?
I think it's still all very surreal to me right now. I got the call on Friday, and I've known since then, but it still hasn't sunk in.
I feel very small here. I'll let Schultze handle
this. Well, you know what? I feel like I know this guy. First of all, I can see eye to eye. He's a Pac-10 guy, Washington State, Pac-10 guy, Arizona. He's getting his degree in psychology. That's what I took in school. Now, I was fortunate enough to have a 12-year career in football. What is it going to take for you to spend 12 years with these Toronto Argonauts and excel in this game?
For me, I think it's just going to be coming in, realizing I'm a young athlete, still have a lot to learn, and just be willing to work and put in everything I got.
The next thing I want to understand is, Farhan mentioned this about the lack of starts at Washington State, but I think what you have to understand is Joe was recruited by one coach. In the middle of his career, they had another coach. And the second coach, if you're not recruited by that coach, he dismisses you. So the fact that you don't have that many starts doesn't bother me at all. Talk about the tough transition between Coach A and Coach B.
It's definitely a change, from being a coach's athlete and then having a new coach come in and they tell you, they want to get their younger guys a start and they want them experienced because they want to rebuild the program with their athletes. And it's difficult to watch that happen, but I understand the process, so you can't be too mad about it.
Hey, congratulations. I know you got some friends and family in a different time zone watching. How are they feeling today?
They're all surprised. They're amazed. They can't believe it. They've been blowing up my phone all day. And, I'm sure it's just a start.
Enjoy it. Welcome to the CFL.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Joe Appel, #2 overall, Toronto Argonauts, who are once again on the clock because of that deal overnight and then the deal with the BC Lions to get #3. And Adam Rita and Jim Barker and the Argonauts brass busy right now.
Well, there's a couple of directions, Rod, that I think they could go with this pick, but when you look at their roster as far as the Canadian talent, there are a lot of question marks that Jim Barker has to answer. I mean, Kevin Ivan is a perennial all-star with this football team. Kevin Ivan was really the last impact player to be drafted by the Toronto Argonauts as far as playing for the Argonauts, and that was back in 2001. Now, Kevin Ivan is 31. He's got a lot of good years left in him. But this may be an area, guys, that they could look for someone to step in and be the next Kevin Ivan.
Yeah, and they've got Pottinger, and they've got Raheem Fontaine. I think they got quality depth there, and I think they're going to look to add there. And the Toronto Argonauts need depth everywhere. They need production on the football field now, and I think that's not a bad area to concentrate on. But I really believe that picking up the big man, Joe, was huge. And I can tell you right now, Schultze, that #10 jersey that he was holding there is not going to fit him.
Not even close. I think the Argonauts are easy to assess. Defensively, they're going to be fine. Offensive line, quarterback, and receivers. Can they bring that aspect of their game to together?
Yeah, it's a big question right now. And obviously, they've, got Joe Appel right now. They're looking for another body. Who will it be? Lots of questions about linebacker. Let's go to the commissioner right now. Here's Mark Hohan.
With the 3rd overall pick, the Argos select Corey Greenwood, linebacker from Concordia University. BC, you are now on the clock.
There it is. 2 and 3 go to the Argos. First, Joe Appel, and now Corey Greenwood, rated very high by Dwayne Ford, Concordia, Kingston, Ontario native, and again, rated very well at the E-Camp. The CIS Defensive Player of the Year, Mr. Ford.
Corey Greenwood, Rod, is one of these guys who is just an outstanding athlete. And this is what separates so many CIS linebackers from being CFL linebackers. It's not a matter of understanding the system, a matter of fundamental skills, but just the ability to run and play at CFL speed. Corey Greenwood absolutely has that, whether he's running in a straight line, terrific lateral movement. For a Toronto Argonaut team that may be able to play a couple of Canadian linebackers, as the panel mentioned, Corey Greenwood's a fantastic fit.
Now, Steve, the Toronto Argos passed on Shamari Williams. They got a linebacker in Corey Greenwood. Compare the two.
Well, I think the biggest thing that Corey brings is he's a true middle linebacker. He's a guy that can play in the middle. He can. He's also played on the outside at the CIS level, and I think they're looking for a guy that can also help right away on teams. I think he has that.
This guy showed so much speed and athleticism at E-Camp, and what you notice from the field stuff more than anything is just his overall production.
He's got a nose for the football. And whether it takes him 2 minutes, 2 days, 2 months, or 2 years to be an impact linebacker, he was ready for special teams yesterday. He 4th in the nation in tackles, President's Trophy winner. This kid can play, and special teams is where he'll start.
I know that he was fairly disappointed he didn't get a shot at the NFL with Kansas City. Dwayne, how fast is it going to take for him to get over that and lock in on this?
Oh, I think Corey Greenwood's going to be over that already. He's focused in on being a very good CFL player, having a long career here.
Trust me, you'll like Toronto a lot better than Kansas City. Rod?
There you go. And that's the way it goes for a lot of linebacker selections. Jim Barker standing by. He'll chat with us, the new Argos head coach. A couple of big picks for the Toronto Argonauts. Our CFL Canadian draft will continue on TSN after this.
The Toronto Argonauts, with the 3rd pick in the 1st round, are proud to select draft number 294, Corey Greenwood, linebacker from Concordia.
Corey Greenwood, CIS Defensive Player of the Year, is the latest Toronto Argo after Joe Appel gets selected. New head coach of the Toronto Argonauts, Jim Barker, joins us now. Tell us about the last 48 hours, Coach, and the thought process for the Toronto Argonauts. And knowing that Shamari Williams was available, why did you go the route you went?
Well, we felt we had a couple of things we needed to address, and with this deal, it allowed us to address more than just one issue. So we're thrilled to death. We think these 2 players can come in and help us immediately, and that's kind of what our organization needed.
Coach Barker, Matt Dunnigan here. How much was Mike O'Shea, your new coach on your staff, in your ear about picking up Corey Greenwood?
Well, Matt, obviously you know Osh, and he was on a daily basis. To have a player with his athleticism and size, he fills a void that it's tough to find. So from a special team standpoint, it's great for us to get Corey. And from Corey's standpoint, to have a mentor like Mike O'Shea is going to be great for him, too.
And, Coach, getting back to your first choice in Joe Appel at tackle, address that a little bit with you. You say you're looking for a guy that can come in and play right away.
Well, I'm looking for a guy that down the road we think has a chance to play right away, and whether he's going to come in and compete. And that's the biggest thing, is that we feel he has the athleticism and he has the background to be able to come in and compete. And that's what we needed out of that spot. For us, it was important to get a guy that's going to be there right now.
You got 2 2nd and 3rd pick, Coach. Congratulations on your new acquisitions. Are you going to make any big deals in the next round?
You know I'm always on the phone.
I know you are. I know you are. We'll let you get back to work. Thanks to Jim Barker. Again, Joe Appel goes number 2, and Corey Greenwood goes number 3, offensive lineman and linebacker. And now the number 4 pick, which was owned by Saskatchewan, but again, BC gets this pick now. And the Lions, here's what their Canadian player situation. And Guys, we've done this before. We've talked about the BC Lions as being a powerhouse, but this is kind of a transition time for the BC Lions.
It really is, because, you know, this is a team that has really drafted well throughout the years in the Canadian College Draft, has provided starters and impact players to this league. But they're going through a little bit of a transition period, and with Angus Reid healthy again, it looks like their O-line is solidified, but that's always an area they could go. And the one question I would have is possibly back on defense and in the secondary with Baron Miles, the guy who is on his way, the future Hall of Famer in the Canadian Football League, is now a coach with the BC Lions. Tad Crawford is penciled in to take his spot, but who knows? That's an area they may want to look at as well, guys.
Yeah, I'd look at Jason Araki, and you got James Yurchek, the 2 linebackers. You know, I think they can need some depth there. You know, they shipped Jason Jimenez down the road to Hamilton, and that leaves a glaring hole on the offensive line. This is a football team that's lost Ricky Foley. It's they sent Javier Glatt to Edmonton. Right. You know, they lost Claremont last year. You know, this team is now decimated as far as Canadian depth goes, so a lot of places BC can look to fill some holes.
Well, they're very good in the sense that they kind of yin and yang you, in that they'll look for a future, but they'll also look for the present. They did a great job with Yurachuk, and they also had some patience with Jamal Lee. So it's unpredictable what they'll do. But remember, Davis Sanchez cannot play forever as a corner on that football team. So if there is a defensive back, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Okay, this was a pick that was originally owned by Edmonton, then Saskatchewan had it, and of course the trade overnight, so Toronto got it, and they traded with BC. Got all that? Nope.
Got all that.
Here it is. Here it is, the number 4 pick overall, the BC Lions.
Here we go for BC. With the 4th overall pick, the BC Lions select Danny Watkins, offensive lineman from Baylor University. Calgary, you are now on the clock.
Danny Watkins is the number 4 pick overall in the 2010 CFL Canadian Draft from Baylor out of Kelowna, BC, 6 feet 4 inches, 310 pounds. Big starting left goal for Baylor, and I know, Dwayne Ford, this is a young man that you liked particularly.
Absolutely. Congratulations to the BC Lions. You guys just got the best player in this draft. Now the question is he ever going to be a BC Lion? Danny Watkins, a terrific prospect, the first player off the board who has another year of NCAA eligibility left. So he's going to return to Baylor, and the expectation is he will, at the very least, get into an NFL camp a year from now. So the BC Lions are taking a little bit of a gamble here, but their philosophy is, let's get the best possible football player, and that is, in 2010, Danny Watkins.
Now, as we look at Watkins' selection, he's 6'4", which by NFL standards might be a little short as an offensive tackle. He's also 26 years old. How much more upside is there as far as that league is concerned, Steph?
I think one of the big things that helps you make the transition from the college level to the pros is at 22, you haven't reached your ceiling. There's lots of potential to get a little bigger, a little stronger. At 26, that might change. His ceiling may be, he may be at it right now, and therefore he better be battle ready right away because he's in his prime.
The guy's only played 3 seasons of football. It's just an unbelievable story. He headed down to Fresno to help his girlfriend move into Fresno State University, ran into somebody there who knew he wanted to be a firefighter, said, hey, why don't you go to Butte College? They've got a fire program, and here he is playing at Baylor.
Well, it's interesting. I was recruiting out in Kelowna one year with the Okanagan Sun. I was meeting with his buddy Carlos, and Danny shows up, and at that time he was playing defensive line, 2 years experience, no high school, and I always wondered what happened to him, and well, sure enough, he ended up at Butte, from Butte on to Baylor, and I'm watching him on some of the highlights, and what's he doing? Playing against Texas.
Yeah, and it's unbelievable because the media down in Texas just love Watkins' naivete because he really has no idea that he's in the big time. And he said he didn't even realize the importance of his position, left tackle. He said it's all cupcakes and brownies to me, Rod.
Well, there it is, the blind side. Calgary Stampeders are on the clock for the 5th selection, joined now by the commissioner, Mark Cohan, 4 selections down. This is a big day, obviously, as you mentioned, for young Canadian football players. I want to chat with you a little bit about the league right now. 2 months out from opening day. I know the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, expires June 5th. You may not be able to comment on it, but there's some concern that there might not be a CFL season.
Well, you know, really what we're working towards is a new collective agreement, and that's exactly what we're trying. You know, our chief operating officer, our negotiating team, we're meeting with the union, and it's our objective to get a new deal done before the start of the season.
A couple of hot button issues for the league, and there's always stuff about any professional sports league. Ownership. BC Lions, Toronto Argonauts, now under the same stewardship of David Braley.
Yeah, and
concerned?
No, I'm not concerned. We've already seen it. You know, it's been several months now. If you look at it, both coaches, both GMs, they want to win. They're not going to compromise themselves in any way. And I think David Braley's been a great owner in this league, and I think he's going to help in Toronto.
Interesting situation in BC this year because of the Grey Cup next year and the renovations being done to BC Place. The Lions are going to play at Empire Stadium. How's that going?
It's a little bit of a throwback, and they're building the stadium now. It's going to be about 28,000 seats. I think it's going to be fun. I'm going to get out there for a game, and I think the fans in BC are going to have a great time there.
You let the fans speak out after last season. They actually changed the rules for you.
Well, this is the second year we actually reached out to fans, and that was great. And we asked them about overtime. They made a bit of a small change, which is great. So you have to, if you score a touchdown, you now have to go for the 2-point convert. I think that's exciting, and it makes our football game even better.
That's why the fans are the smartest fans in sports.
I know. The one will become their commissioner.
That's what happened to you, right? There
exactly.
You go. The CFL Canadian Draft continues.
As this game became important in the second half, that's when Mike Levinjo stepped up. Touchdown!
So, the Calgary Stampeders are on the clock, and CFL 2010 game tickets are available. Season ticket packages available now. Single game tickets go on sale June 1st. For details, check out CFL.ca. Tickets today. The Calgary Stampeders now with the 5th selection upcoming. They've had some key departures, including Sandro DeAngelis, who is now a Hamilton Tiger Cat.
Well, and the two departures, Rod, that jump off the page for me are right tackle Jeff Pilon and Demetrius Sumpas, who, of course, was the huge story in the draft a couple of years ago and helped to lead the Calgary Stampeders to a Grey Cup championship that year. Remember, that was a last-second draft room trade by Calgary to get Sumpas, and Newman, of course, anchored that offensive line in their Grey Cup year. He's gone, and so is Jeff Pilon. So, guys, to me, those are the two departures that jump off the stage in the offensive line position.
Protect Henry Burris. It's huge, and they did a great job picking up Newman, Sumpas, and all that. But I'm looking on the back on the other side of the football, and Wes Lysak. He's a lone Canadian defensive back in that backfield, and they took a huge step forward on Friday by signing Eric Frazier, the 2009 draft pick, who went back to school at Central Michigan, and gaining some depth back there. But Wes Lysak needs some help because he's a lone wolf back there. And he plays free safety like a true grizzled vet at this point, but they need some young depth back there, in my opinion, Schultz.
I want to talk about that defense, too, because I think one of the keys for these Calgary Stampeders is Mike Levinjo. Mike, I watched you at Michigan State. You were an absolute terror. I watched you early in your Canadian Football League, and you were a terror as well. But something happened to your ability to control your weight. You've got to get that down. You've got to play with that explosive ability. If Mike Levinjo comes back and becomes a terror again more than anything else, Glenn, that will help the defense.
And guys, Sandro DeAngelis, too, and you mentioned it right off the top. I mean, every team would love to have Canadian kicker, right?
I thought for sure he was going to stick in the National Football League somewhere this offseason, and to see him in Hamilton is huge for the Ticats.
Head coach and general manager John Huffnagel has made the selection, and with the announcement, here is Mark Cohan.
Thanks again, Rod. With the 5th overall pick and the first pick for the Calgary Stampeders, they select Rob Maver, kicker from Guelph University, Winnipeg. You are now on the clock.
Well, Rob Maver, who is with us and will talk with us shortly, from Guelph, Brampton, Ontario native. You can see the numbers. Burke Dales is a punter there in Calgary. No Sandro DeAngelis. And I know if we have to talk about anybody being an expert in kicking, it's you, Schultz.
Well, this guy might be special. He really might be, because Kyle Walters was the head coach at University of Guelph. Now is a special teams coach at Winnipeg, and he has high praise that this young man is more than just a punter.
There you go. Let's go to Dwayne Ford.
And if there's one guy who's happier right now than Rob Maver, I would say it's the Calgary Stampeders' new special teams coach, Mark Killam, because he's going to be able to sleep a little bit easier knowing that he's got this young man coming in. The best kicking prospect to come along in several years, a guy who can fill all 3 roles, punting, kicking, and doing field goals. So that's something to keep in mind as far as Rob Maver's future upside. But again, one of these guys who has emerged as one of the top 5 players in this draft because he's ready to contribute to a CFL team right now.
Steph, along with a strong leg, what a kicker needs is the ability to deal with pressure. No problem for Maver.
Yeah, he has a unique confidence and swagger about the way he goes about his craft. He reminds me of a young Noel Prefontaine. I wouldn't recommend he tries as a first-year guy to do all the things that Noel does, but he is going to be a fantastic player in this league for many years to come.
Now, with Burkdale still in Calgary, really they need Maven to kick field goals. They don't need him to punt, but he can do both, can't he, Steve?
Yeah, and I think what makes it intriguing for these guys is down the road, you can have one guy, Canadian guy, doing both roles, and I think that's a huge thing. With the 41-plus average, that's a heck of a job right there.
Yeah, in 2007, Warren Keane was taken 7th overall in the first round, and he winds up going to Calgary. So how does that depth situation work? They brought in Keane, who hasn't done much in 3 years, and now they just drafted a guy 5th overall.
Hey, nothing like having competition in training camp. That's what you aim for when you're a coach.
Well, with more, let's take it over to Rod and Glenn.
All right, thank you. And Rob Maver, who's got his Griffin tie on and his University of Guelph pin, and also now a Calgary Stampeder jersey. Tell me that you didn't know that this was happening.
Didn't know. I mean, I thought it would be a possibility, but, you know, I was really shocked when the pick came in, so I'm just really excited and happy right now.
Rob, we saw your numbers punting the football on the chart there, but how do you feel about the field goal kicking part of the job, and is that a strength for you?
I feel that I'm a complete guy. You know, I can do both equally well, so I'm very excited to have that opportunity to go and kick field goals in Calgary.
Who in the CFL have you tried to model sort of your game after?
When I was younger, it's definitely Noel Prefontaine, you know, because I grew up in Brampton, so that's when he was kicking for the Argos. I definitely grew up watching him a lot. And then after that, you know, John Ryan kind of as a punter, but definitely Noel Prefontaine when I was younger.
Yeah, there's a guy who had a long CFL career, so...
Still going.
Yeah, so congratulations on the pick.
And this is a guy who used to hold for kickers. So
Yes.
There you go. So he knows all about kickers.
I know all about him.
Yeah. Congratulations. Welcome to the Canadian Football League and the Calgary Stampeders.
Thank you very much.
Rob Maver is the number 5 selection in the CFL draft. Our CFL Canadian draft will continue in a moment.
And all game long, Doug Brown was a presence in the middle. And it's picked off. Ian Logan has it on the tip drill.
5 selections have been completed in the CFL Canadian draft. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers were on the clock for selection number 6, but a trade has been made, and with more on that, let's go to Commissioner Mark Cohon.
Rod, I love this wheeling and dealing. So here's the news. Winnipeg has traded the 6th overall pick to Edmonton in exchange for the 9th and 22nd overall picks. So Edmonton, you are now on the clock.
Well, the Edmonton Eskimos now get this pick at number 6, and Joe Mack, the new general manager in Winnipeg, decides not to select at 6. Glenn Suter?
Interesting, because I talked to Paul LaPolice, new head coach in Winnipeg, prior to the draft, and Paul was telling me that he wants to sort of change the philosophy there and not trade away draft picks and not move around too much in the Canadian college draft. But you know, this maybe, guys, is a testament to the fact that it is a deep draft. In other words, 3, 4, you could probably go into round 4 and still get a good football player.
That's
here.
just it. I think that's exactly what's going on here. Is Winnipeg sees that they get 2 for 1. They get 2 picks and into this deep draft, and it does surprise me a bit because of what Lapo was preaching, you know, early in his tenure there in Winnipeg. But Joe Mack has got different plans, and Edmonton definitely wanted to move up.
Well, you know what it is? It's not a big trade. It's just a little trade. It's just like we're moving down a little bit. You know, just 2 spots. We still can identify a kid that we want, and like you said, Maddie, we get another kid. So there is method behind the madness. But I'll tell you this. The stats are out there. The Bombers do not necessarily depend on the Canadian kids to develop them in the past, and I think that's a mistake.
Perhaps Joe Mack and Paul LaPolice, there was a player that they wanted in the top 5, and they said, okay, let's go down because it is so deep.
Yeah, and Winnipeg, you know, they had 4 picks coming into this draft. Now they have 5, and that's huge because this draft is so deep in talent.
All right.
The Edmonton Eskimos get a chance to move up.
Let's go to Dwayne Ford. Dwayne?
Well, let's talk a bit about what Edmonton might be thinking here with the trade to move up, because I know that one of the players they were coveting was Danny Watkins. The Lions took him earlier than most people expected at 4. So what's Edmonton thinking at 6 right now with their needs?
Well, in terms of their needs, you have to think a little bit about the offensive line and moving into position to take another one of these red shirts. They thought they were probably going to be the team that got the ball rolling as far as the red shirts with Watkins at 9. BC beat them to the punch. Now that seal has been cracked, so to speak, and they want to make sure they get in before that run is over.
So the next red shirt type lineman on the board, you're either looking at Josh Reinders, who's a CIS kid, or Jonathan Bender. Which one?
There was a lot of talk that the Edmonton Eskimos liked John Bender as their #2 guy behind Danny Watkins.
So what happens if you're Winnipeg now? You look at Winnipeg's situation, and here's a team that hasn't picked in the first round for such a long time. They need special teams players. They needed a linebacker. Steph, as we'll go to you here, and a lot of people thought maybe Josh Jesse, but he may be gone now by the time they get to 9. Is receiver a possibility?
I think so. Again, we talk about the depth of receiver, and no one's taken any yet. Well, the pressure's off because there's so many of them, and so maybe Winnipeg's thinking they got some time, and there's still going to be some quality receivers left.
And who are those guys? We've talked about Corey Watson, we've talked about Jordan Sisco, but in terms of what Winnipeg's needs will potentially be at 9 and what they've got a Canadian receiver, who do you like next off the board?
I like Watson. I think with his size and speed, I think he's the guy that can come in and be an impact player. And as Steph mentioned earlier, he can be a teamer right away.
And one guy who we expected to go third, maybe fourth was Gore. He's still on the board. Does Edmonton possibly move up to take him at 6?
I don't think they take him at 6. I think that they've already made a trade this offseason for Andre Talbot to help out their Canadian receiver depth a little bit. You know, I think a lot of the talk for Edmonton has been in the trenches.
Well, here's Gore right now, and again, a player that the BC Lions certainly coveted with their trade, and he's a guy that is just a big-time player, isn't he, Dwayne?
Oh, absolutely. Sean Gore, to me, is the best receiver in this draft. Certainly one of the best CIS football player, a pro-ready guy, very refined, very smooth, runs terrific routes, catches the ball very well. If Sean Gore ends up in the Canadian Football League, the team that gets him is going to be thrilled, but it's a big if at this point.
Absolutely, and the Eskimos really feel good about their situation at most Canadian positions. An intriguing pick coming up, Rod.
Edmonton Eskimos, they are ready, and so is our commissioner, Mark Cohan.
Now with the 6th overall pick, the Edmonton Eskimos select Brian Bulke, defensive end from Stanford University. Montreal, you are now on the clock.
So the Edmonton Eskimos get Brian Bulke. Tecumseh, Ontario native, 6'4", 281. Wrist injury hampered him in 2009. The 8th Canadian-born player to ever play at Stanford. Let's go to Dwayne.
Well, when we expected the Edmonton Eskimos to jump in on the red shirt derby, we thought it would be on the offensive line. They go defensive line. Brian Bulke, a guy who came into this season ranked as the #1 prospect on many teams' boards, suffered a wrist injury early in the season. That led him to take an injury redshirt year. Having that other year of eligibility, the associated weight for a CFL team drafting him causes him to slide down a little bit. Hasn't affected anybody's opinion of this young man's ability to play. Very bright young man, very experienced. 4 years in the Pac-10. It'll be 5 by the time he comes out. The Edmonton Eskimos are going to get a very good football player.
Yeah, and let's talk a bit about how the ratio impacts this, because defensive line is a place where everybody wants to use a Canadian. Steph, how soon can Bulke make an impact?
That one is going to be tough to say. Again, the rules and that yard and the difference of the Canadian game and the essence and the need for speed, especially inside, is unique and something he may not have a ton of experience at. We'll see.
Steve, talk a little bit about what Bulke does well, because he seems to be able to play run and pass with equal effectiveness.
Well, from the tape that I've watched on him, the one thing that he has is he recognizes where the ball is. I mean, anybody that's trying to step to block him, he sheds that very well. He has a real nose for the ball, and and I agree with Steph. It's tough to be a little bit of a projected guy where you're going to be, but once you start going, I see him as an impact player, and with an extra year, I think Edmonton has 2 defensive linemen already.
At 6'4", 281, is the NFL even a possibility for him coming out of the Pac-10?
Well, it's certainly a possibility for a guy like Brian Bulke, who's played at the level that he has played. But a guy who I think is a safer pick among the red shirts for the Edmonton Eskimos, as you said, because of that size, that he is a little bit more likely to end up in the Canadian Football League a year from now.
Spoke to Danny Machocha earlier this week, and one of the things he's really excited about is that Adam Braidwood, after 2 injury-plagued seasons, appears to have a clean bill of health, and they expect him to be full go come training camp, and they think he'll pick up where he left off a year ago, so that much more defensive line depth for the Eskimos.
Adam Braidwood, Farhan, was the only first-rounder that the Edmonton Eskimos have had over the last 5 years, and so now Brian Bulke now joins that crew, and he is a member now of the Canadian Football League, selected with the 6th pick overall. The defending Grey Cup champions are next.
Sports Center, this is top 10. This is highlight of the night. Have you seen a better catch than that? Shea Emery strips Martell Mallett.
Well, the Montreal Alouettes will make the final selection of the first round, the 7th overall. Keep in mind, there normally are 8 picks, but the Hamilton Tiger Cats had to forfeit their pick this year because of the supplemental draft when they took Zach Carlson last year. So the defending Grey Cup champions are currently on the 8-minute clock right now, the Montreal Alouettes. What in goodness gracious name do the Montreal Alouettes need?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a team that has really drafted well. I mean, 35% of the 70 players that they've drafted in the last 10 years have become impact players in the CFL. So this is a team that usually drafts guys for the future, and maybe some depth behind Shea Emery, because Emery, although he stepped in and played tremendous as a starter last year in the middle of that defense for the Montreal Alouettes, you need to find depth behind a guy like Shea Emery, especially as a Canadian. Now, this Montreal team is a team, Matty, that was like the Saskatchewan Roughriders in they played more than their minimum of Canadian talent, which means if you lose a Canadian, then you could replace him with an American and change the ratio elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's, a good example of that is what happened this year when they lose a Davis Sanchez. They've got Paul Waldo, in effect, ready to take his spot. And Etan Boulay, who plays at free safety, his natural position is cornerback, too. So they basically got 2 Canadians to step in for Davis Sanchez. This is how well covered the Montreal Alouettes are. But if there is some depth in some area that could use some depth, Schulte, it would be at that linebacker position because they have 2. They have Shea Emery and they have Walter Spencer.
How much longer is Ben Cahoon going to play football? I mean, Ben Cahoon has a great life outside of football. So is this his last year? Now, for a receiver to come into the Canadian Football League and have instantaneous success, it rarely happens. Usually those kids start as your special teams, they get assimilated within the program, and then they excel, as you were talking about with Shea Emery. Great special teams players first year, dominant linebacker, and he transitioned into a headhunter by the end of the year. So how long is Ben Cahoon going to play?
Well, maybe the answer to that is how long is Anthony Calvillo going to keep playing, because those guys came into the league together. They played together. They'll be on a porch somewhere together when they finally are, retired.
They're all coming back.
Yeah.
She's coming back. Who's back? AC's not going anywhere. They're trying to get while the getting's good. And Trestman has certainly established a mindset there, along with Jim Popp, of a team that's loaded in Canadian talent and good times are in their future.
Can Danny Daravo, can Delorier, are these guys that can step up, though? Because you make a good point about Ben Cahoon.
I like Delorier. I think he's a big 6'4" target. I think this kid can run, and I think he's the next guy in my mind.
Speaking of targets, that's the bullseyes on the Montreal Alouettes, the defending Grey Cup champions this season. It is their selection, 7th overall, final pick of the first round, and here is Commissioner Mark Cohon.
Now, with the 7th overall pick, our defending Grey Cup champions, the Montreal Alouettes, select Christian Matt, offensive lineman from Concordia University. Saskatchewan, you are again on the clock.
So the 3rd O-lineman to go in this first round, Christian Matt from Saint-Hubert, Quebec, 6'3", 291. He did sign a free agent contract with the Houston Texans, so clearly a future prospect. Duane Ford, tell us more.
Well, we know that the Montreal Alouettes like to have their guys who have those Quebec roots, the community relations. But Christian Matt, this isn't just a political pick. This guy can flat out play football. Outstanding player, has played some tackle, may move inside to the guard position at the CFL level, but a technically sound player, a surprisingly good athlete. This is what attracted the Houston Texans to this young man. Some teams thought he might slip a little bit because he didn't participate in the one-on-ones when he was at the E-camp. Some people took that as a little bit of a snub, but the bottom line, a very good football player, and not unlike the Montreal Alouettes' history to take a player who they may have to wait for a little bit. It's panned out in the past.
Steve, we'll start with you because I know that you've seen Concordia. Christian Matt, and he's a guy that is very experienced. When you talk about the Watkins and the Reinders of the world, this guy's played a lot of football in a very good system and never misses an assignment. What stood out to you against him?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I saw that he did was just his ability to make the play. It seemed like last year when I watched him on film a lot, he never broke down. Anytime that he needed to get the edge, he got the edge. I do kind of see him, project him a little bit more as an inside guy, obviously a 6'3" guy, and I think at a guard he's physical enough to do that.
Steph, let's go to you and whether or not this kid winds up coming back. There were some surprises when Houston wound up signing him. He does a lot of things well, but undersized compared to most NFL linemen. Do you think he's got an opportunity there, or will Montreal get him? Because they can afford to wait.
Time will tell, and that's the key. Montreal can afford to wait. It is an interesting bias for the CFL teams on the red shirts because there's lots of NCAA red shirts that they're waiting on, and they went with this CIS one. And as a CIS coach, that's awesome that he's worth waiting for, and the training that he receives and the bias for Canadian institutions seems to be dissipating as we move along in this draft.
Yeah, you mentioned those guys the teams might have to wait for. Joel Reinders still on the board, Jonathan Bender still on the board, and 3 receivers still on the board as well that could have gone in the first round. Will the Saskatchewan Roughriders take one of them? Let's take a look inside the draft room of the Green Riders. They picked number 1. They're picking up next when we get back to the 2010 CFL Draft on CSN.
Young Canadian football players will be selected today. We've seen 7 already begin their CFL journey. Shamari Williams, number 1 overall to the Saskatchewan Roughriders after the trade from Toronto. Joe Appel, Corey Greenwood, Danny Watkins, Rob Maver, Ryan Bulkey, and then Christian Matt, and 2 Concordia Stingers in that first round. A couple of offensive linemen, and during the break, Chris Schultz, you were a little surprised at the futures.
Well, I really was, because there's so many things about pro football when you enter a camp that you cannot predict in so many aspects of the game, like injuries. Whether you go down to a training camp, you get burned out on the game after going through something down in the States, and then you come back to Canada, and then maybe you're so close that you want the pension in the National Football League, and you try hang on and hang on and hang on. Now, there's no guarantee that all these futures are going to come up to the CFL, but the doggone reason is they're really good players.
And that's really what makes this draft one of the most difficult in pro sports, is that there are so many intangibles that you have to deal with. I'm a little surprised the BC Lions took Danny Watkins so early in this draft. I mean, yes, he's the best player, and I know that's always tempting, but I would think that their needs were probably first on the defensive side of the football, and then Matty, maybe receiver, with O'Neal Wilson out there not getting any younger.
Yeah, and you know, another surprise to me, and something that's is the trade that happened with Edmonton and Winnipeg. You know, with La Police preaching that, you know, he's going to keep his draft choices, but as it's turning out, Lapo and Joe Mack may be bang on, because some of these that we have seen some surprises and some futures, and some of those guys that they projected possibly could be gone already, they're still available at the 9th and 22 spots that Winnipeg now possesses.
And those projections, you know, we talked a lot about, you know, some really good young receivers that are available. We haven't had a receiver yet, and good chance in the second round we could see a receiver or a couple of receivers chosen. Let's go to the commissioner now. The Saskatchewan Roughriders with the first pick of the second round, the 8th pick overall. And here's Mark Cohan.
With the 8th overall pick, the Riders select Jordan Cisco, wide receiver from the University of Regina. Winnipeg is now on the clock.
Well, a lot of Regina Rams, Glenn Suter, play for those Saskatchewan Roughriders.
You know, the Saskatchewan Roughriders do a nice job of trying to find athletes that are from the province, and it certainly helps when they're selling tickets.
Yeah, and Jordan Cisco, well, the first receiver off the board. Let's go to Dwayne Ford.
Well, Jordan Cisco, considered next to Sean Gore to be the guy who's most ready to step into a CFL system amongst the receivers in this draft. Very smooth receiver, good after the catch, runs good routes, and comes from a system that we know produces CFL receivers. Jason Claremont, Chris Bauman, Chris Getzlaff, Jordan Cisco, welcome to the party.
Yeah, and the obvious comparison, because he's an ex-Regina player, is Jason Claremont, and such a good route runner as Jordan Cisco, and he's also very physical at the point of catch. Can this guy play right away?
He's a marquee CIS player, 52 receptions last year. I really like his body control. In and out of his breaks, he's balanced, and he can accelerate out of his cuts. I think he's probably more of a true receiver and not as physical a player as Claremont, but hometown boy, and he'll have lots of support in those stands.
Yeah, it would have been very difficult after watching the Riders lose Jason Claremont so many years ago for them to not take this guy. And when you look at Cisco, there might be other flashier players, Steve, but there's nobody more productive.
No, I mean, as Steph just said, 52 receptions. The thing that I liked best about him was the fact that he had a 4.5 40. He has speed, and I love the way he got in and out of his breaks.
He's going to Indianapolis, and Cal Murphy is the Indianapolis factor. So does that automatically buy him a bit of a longer look than most guys would get in Indianapolis?
Well, there is the running joke, Farhan, in CFL circles about Cal Murphy having one free one every year, that he brings up that one, whether it's a CIS player or a player from the Canadian Football League, and those players usually end up sticking. Whether or not that's the case with Jordan Cisco is tough to say, because he was not offered a contract. He's at a rookie mini camp on that free agent invite, so there is no contract there. The Saskatchewan Roughriders certainly hope that Cal doesn't get his freebie here.
And if you're Saskatchewan, the more accurate comparison might not be Jason Claremont, according to Wally Buono. It might be Dave Sapunjas. Either of those, Rod, are pretty good if he turns out that well.
Well, how about that? You know, again, you wait to hear your name announced, and imagine your name is announced by the team that you grew up watching in your hometown.
That can be great, but that also can be a detriment, because that is added pressure. I played for the Toronto Argonauts. I didn't necessarily like to be known in my town. I'd rather be out of town and play football out of town.
I look at this selection. I think it's an awesome pick for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. A lot of people say why, because they're already, packed full of Canadian depth. But you start three Canadians in Bag, Getzlaff, and Fantus. You better have some capable backups. And certainly, I think that Dave McCoy, a receiver who's been on the roster for a number of years with Saskatchewan, is certainly that guy. And this pick to me makes complete sense, because when you start three, you better have some capable backups.
Yeah, that's sort of the interesting part about it for me, Matt, because when you look at their depth at receiver, you can say, well, if someone goes down, you can play an American, because they do play with more Canadians than the minimal requirements, so you can make those adjustments on the fly. But like I mentioned earlier, this is a team like the Montreal Alouettes that if there is a quality athlete, and this isn't charity, if there's a quality athlete available that comes from the province, they feel it's very, very important to try and get one of those guys, because they do help sell tickets and they do get the crowd excited.
What a line, though, an assembly line of pass catchers, Canadian pass catchers in Saskatchewan.
Oh, it's amazing. It was the story of the Grey Cup, guys, with how much depth and how good they were at Canadian receiver.
A name we haven't mentioned is Jason Claremont here, and
Yeah.
I think he could be, next in line to possibly be shuffled down the road. Jason was not used a lot, but you had talked to Coach Miller, and Coach Miller says he plans to play a little bit more.
Ken Miller, Matty, said to me that Jason Claremont will see more time. Underutilized last year.
I'll believe that when I see it.
Quick one for you guys. Darian Durant, obviously the star there, but there are rumors that Kerry Joseph wants to go back to Regina.
Well, and an interesting fit, because it was Darian Durant who sort of modeled his game after Kerry Joseph and looked up to him.
All right, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are on the clock right now, thanks to that trade with the Edmonton Eskimos. And now Joe Mack will make the selection unless he trades it. Here's what the Bombers' Canadian situation is.
Yeah, I look at Doug Brown and that as a projected starter, and there's a guy who's not getting any younger there. I had a long talk with Paul LaPolice, guys, and he feels pretty good at free safety and the defensive side of the ball. He thinks Ian Logan, and I agree with him, is ready to take a huge step and become an impact player in the secondary. So interesting here, maybe D-line.
Yeah, do they have a plugger? Because if Doug Brown goes down, do you have a body big enough to take on two all the time? I think that could be a spot where the Winnipeg Blue Bombers could add some depth.
The only fear I have is Dave Dickinson as the quarterback. You have to protect him, so if there is an offensive lineman out there that you think can come in and be a part of a protection package, that may be a logical pick.
And that is a big news of Buck Pierce to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I know what you're thinking, though. Second selection in the second round, 9th overall to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers because of the trade. Let's go to Commissioner Mark Cohen.
With the 9th overall pick and their first pick, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers select Corey Watson, wide receiver from Concordia University, BC. You are now on the clock.
So all those receivers that were laying in the weeds waiting in that first round, here they are in the second round. And another Concordia stinger, the third star from Concordia to go in this draft so far. Good draft for Concordia, good draft right now for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers take Corey Watson. Dwayne.
Corey Watson, a unique receiver in this deep class of pass catchers. The thing I love that Corey Watson brings to the table is a physical element. I think he is the toughest receiver in this draft, a guy who will go out and bang. And even if he doesn't contribute right away on offense, which he'll get an opportunity to do, Corey Watson is a guy who can certainly play some special teams. A big receiver, faced a lot of double coverages this year at Concordia and managed to fight through all of that without a problem, still had a very productive year.
A physical receiver. Of all the receivers in the first round, well, none of them went in the first round, but there was talk that 3 or 4 could go. Of all of those top-end receivers, is he the most physical?
I think he is. I think you need to be in the CFL. The speed at which the game is played at the next level means you can't run away from the DBs all the time. So leverage your 6'2" frame, bump into them, and create some separation with your physicality, plus play some special teams.
What about his route running? A lot of people say his speed is underrated, and he uses how he runs routes to get open.
Well, I think the big thing that jumped at me was when they talked about his lack of speed. His 40 shows a 4.57, and I think that's pretty good speed. And I think what he's done is he's utilized his body. He knows how to control his body, and sometimes he may not look like he's going as fast as he actually is, but he's getting separation, and he uses his size well.
Well, Rod, you know, as we talk about Watson, this kid never grew up playing football. He moved to Canada from Jamaica when he was 9 years old. He says when he first saw the game, it was like watching Knights in the Middle Ages. I was shocked you were able to hit, and that's what turned him to the game.
All right. Good for him. And so Corey Watson. 2 wide receivers now taken in the second round, and the BC Lions are on the clock. When we come back, a discussion about a Canadian quarterback in the CFL. Stay with us as our draft rolls on. Well, the BC Lions, who took Danny Watkins in the first round, an offensive lineman out of Baylor, will select next with the 10th pick overall. They are on the clock, and here is their situation for Canadian players as our Canadian draft continues for the CFL 2010. So what do you think, Glenn Suter?
Yeah, you know, those projected starters there, when you look at the top of that with Paris Jackson and O'Neal Wilson, and you think about, okay, both are starting in the lineup, who plays behind them? I mean, to me, that's a spot where, you know, the BC Lions were looking at a guy like Sean Gore early in the first round, and they have now a chance to get him because he slipped through to the second. Now, O'Neal Wilson's not getting any younger out there at the wide receiver position. He's been kind of a journeyman, kind of a guy who's been consistent but not a real impact player. Could they upgrade in that position in this draft right now and in this pick?
Yeah, and I thought BC had picked a linebacker with their first choice, but I was wrong. You know, they went to O-line. And
that's only one time you've been wrong.
First time ever.
Oh, let's try that. But there was still it's a glaring weakness or a place, a depth that they need. You know, if you've got James Yurchuk and you've got Jason Araki. In my opinion, this is an area that they need to add some depth, and there are some quality linebackers still available, Schultz.
Well, I think, you know, it's very tempting to do whatever you can to make sure that Casey Printers has another outstanding last part of the year that he can just flow into the start of this year, because I thought one of the best stories was to see that young man get his confidence back. And you know Coach Wally Buono, more than anything else, he believes the quarterback dictates the future of your team. Support the quarterback.
Yeah, Casey Printers' era begins anew again in BC, and might it be another pass catcher? We've had 2 in a row in the second round. Could it be a hat trick? Let's join Commissioner Mark Cohon.
Well, it is another pass catcher. With the 10th overall pick, the BC Lions select Sean Gore, wide receiver from Bishop's University. Toronto, you are now on the clock.
Sean Gore is now off the board. Great numbers during eCamp. Toronto, Ontario native. And of course, again, we talk about futures. Another one of those guys who accepted an invitation to an NFL rookie minicamp, but he was high on your list, Dwayne Ford.
Absolutely, Rod. I love Sean Gore. I think he is one of the top handful of players in this draft. As we said earlier, a smooth receiver, a guy who is ready to step in and contribute in a CFL system right now. I look at the Lions' first couple picks in this draft and wonder, everybody keeps talking about Wally Buono getting towards the last year of his career. Wally's picking these futures. I think he might have to hang around for a while to see the likes of Danny Watkins and Sean Gore. Again, a lot of talk that Sean Gore, who's at that rookie minicamp on an invitation, that he is likely to sign a contract today with the Green Bay Packers. So there's going to be a little bit of a wait for him. But this is, without a doubt, the best receiver in this draft.
Well, some people had talked about him going #1 overall a couple of weeks ago. And if you're Wally Buono, you made that trade at the top of the round because you wanted to pick Gore at 3. You backed off because of Green Bay, and you've got him anyway.
Yeah, it's almost like their strategy happened in reverse, because the way the BC Lions wanted all of this to go down in a perfect world was to get Sean Gore in the first round and get Danny Watkins in the second round. Well, they flipped the tables and still came out with the 2 guys that they really wanted. Now, of course, there's the issue of whether Gore shows up or not, but they got 2 fantastic prospects. Now they just keep their fingers crossed.
Every coach I've talked to about Sean Gore says he does everything well: speed, quickness, intelligence, toughness, the whole thing.
It's the great story I heard out of eCamp was he walked into the initial meetings with the coaches and said, I'm going to catch everything tomorrow. Predicted it, did it. The confidence that he exudes and the maturity, this is the complete package. And I agree with Dwayne, the best receiver in the class.
What about toughness? Here's a guy that played 3 games this year with a broken hand. If he does come back this year, they'll look for him to get involved on special teams. Can he do all of those things?
Absolutely. Again, the toughness part comes into play for him, and he's fantastic. The thing that when we played against him 2 years ago that was the most impressive was, 1, he was able to go and make a play on the ball when it was in the air, and 2, the yak he got after he made the catch.
And he knows who's important. I asked him about being near the top, or a reporter asked him about being near the top of the CFL draft, the rankings by Dwayne Ford. He said, well, it's good to know people in high places are noticing. Rod?
There you go. High praise for Dwayne Ford. Should be. And there's another great Bishop's receiver out there, Steve Turner, who had the best numbers at eCamp. And here's the Toronto Argonauts coming up now with the 11th selection overall, the 4th selection in the 2nd round. And the Argos draft room. Jim Barker is busy, and the Argos again selecting 2nd and 3rd, making deals earlier. Joe Appel and Corey Greenwood, newest Argos. They are going to make the announcement shortly.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I thought, in the offseason here, Rod, is how the Toronto Argonauts signed Danny Brannigan, and it's a conversation, I think, that happens this time every year when we talk about Canadian quarterbacks, and when will we see the next Canadian quarterback to start in the CFL? To me, guys, the only way this will happen, or one way that it'll happen in the future, is if every single minor league football team in this country, every single high school football team in this country from coast to coast, especially the big cities like Vancouver and Toronto, start playing Canadian rules. I really believe that when that happens, 5, 6, 10 years down the road, when they're throwing at 8 years old and not 14, 15 years old, Matt, that we will see a Canadian quarterback start.
Well, I think it starts with the collective bargaining agreement. And, you know, if we got half an hour, I could fill that space in, you know, with my passion and certainly desire to see Canadian quarterbacks on rosters. And, you know, when I came in the league, there were only 2 spots at quarterback, you know, and not much. But there's 3 now. And I think if you mandate that one of those 3 must be a Canadian, you start cultivating those quarterbacks into positions that they actually can aspire to be playing the most dynamic position in the Canadian Football League. And I've seen them. I've played with them. I had one on my team in Calgary when I coached there, and I believe in Canadian quarterbacks. It blows my mind, Schultze. I don't understand how Americans continue to come up here, never playing a game, and taking jobs away from Canadians that play this game most of their lives.
That's an American speaking, too.
It is. But here's my thought on that. I think quarterback is the toughest position in all of sports because you handle the ball every time. Now, if you're a middle linebacker, right, or you're an interior player and you make a mistake, you have a support system around you to make a mistake. If you're a quarterback and you make a mistake, an interception, a fumble, if you make a mental error, it's called a turnover. And it's not so much that the talent isn't here, it's the position that has so much pressure to play perfect football that it's not necessarily on the same developmental level as other positions in football.
We just saw a video there of Eric Glavich, who was the College Player of the Year. Danny Brannigan, of course, won the Vanier Cup, and Michael Folds from Western, who's a tremendous quarterback as well. Brannigan gets signed. You wonder if there are others out there. You know, there are 24 positions that are filled, really 28 if you had long snapper, a holder, a kicker, and a punter. How can 27 of those be filled by Canadians and not that one extra one at quarterback position?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Well, maybe that's what you were talking about, Matty, and that we should open up a roster spot for a Canadian quarterback and see if we give them 2 or 3 years, can they develop?
And I know there are head coaches in this league that believe that they can't ever play in the Canadian Football League, and that's got to change.
I'm not sure about that.
And you got to give those kids an opportunity.
Maybe Commissioner's going to announce the selection of a quarterback. Here is the Toronto Argonauts selection now, 11th overall, 4th in the 2nd round.
Sorry, guys, no surprises here. With the 11th overall pick and the 3rd pick for the Argos, the Toronto Argonauts select Grant Shaw, defensive back and kicker from the University of Saskatchewan. Hamilton, you are now on the clock.
So Husky gets selected here. From Edmonton, Alberta, 6'3", 210 pounds. That is a big kicker, too. Look at that, 55 yards. So he's obviously a versatile player. Let's go to Dwayne Ford to tell us more about Grant Shaw.
And Grant Shaw is a guy that Canadian Football League teams look at as a kicker, a guy who hit a couple of field goals from over 50 yards last season, 4 of 6 from beyond 40. He's certainly got a CFL leg, and this was while doing it as a part-time kicker and an all-Canadian defensive back. A guy who can maybe contribute in some other ways on your roster, but as I said, primarily a kicker. This pick fueled by the fact that Hamilton also needs a punter, a kicker, picking right after the Argos at number 12. The number 1 guy on the board, Rob Maver, already gone. Toronto Argonauts were pressured into this one a little bit.
Bit of a surprise because you've also got a kicker at St. Mary's who's still on the board that a lot of CFL teams showed interest in.
Yeah, we had a lot of calls from guys saying, you know, Justin Polarity, he came more as a kicker to them, but one of the things that we did a lot with him was directional punting. His average didn't show as well as some of these other guys, but in terms of his technique and things like that, I think he's a good one.
Yeah, and we just saw Jamie Borum get moved. He's another player that was a college defensive back at Manitoba, also a kicker, and not doing well with it in the CFL. Rod?
Yeah, Jamie Borum, part of that Saskatchewan and Toronto deal earlier today. So the Argos select Grant Shaw, and there's a big draft party going on. Not far from here. Argos draft party. And Joe Appel taken 2nd overall earlier.
New coach, new players, new attitude. Argos football, new and intense. Call 416-341-ARGO or visit argonauts.ca for tickets now.
And 3 brand new Toronto Argonauts selected earlier today. The 12th selection upcoming, going to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, or will it? With an announcement now, here's Commissioner Mark Cohon.
Well, Rod, there's more wheeling and dealing going on. Hamilton has traded the 12th pick to Edmonton in exchange for the 19th and 27th overall picks. Edmonton, you are now on the clock.
So the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who have done a lot of wheeling and dealing the last few years, because again, they quite honestly weren't very good. And last year, renewed hope in Hamilton, a much better football team, and clearly using a lot of their picks a little bit later here, Glenn. We saw them pick so many players in the 1st and 2nd rounds. They were always trading up in the past, and maybe that's the fact that this is a team that's on solid footing now, that they don't need these picks in the 1st and 2nd round.
Well, they had a big draft year last year, and remember who's in charge now, Bobo Bilovich. And we talked about the fact that the BC Lions in their past had a lot of success in the Canadian draft, and Bobo Bilovich was with the BC Lions at that time. So that's one of them. And the other thing I would say, guys, is that when you look at this draft and how so many good players are getting pushed back in the order a little bit, I think these deals can be made. Now, the question in Edmonton, Jesse Lumsden. This has been a guy that's had this hard luck season after season with injuries. Congratulations, by the way, to Jesse on his Olympic performance, but there's still a big question mark hanging over him. Now, with the play Schultz of R.K. Whitlock last year, I'm not sure the Eskimos will go to a running back in the draft here with this 12th
No,
pick.
probably not, but I don't think there's a better football team in the Canadian Football League if you're a young guy than to be a part of than the Edmonton Eskimos. And part of it is the tradition, but also I'll never forget these series of plays with R.K. Whitlock. He drops a touchdown pass, and this is the 2nd week in the CFL season, and he is brand new to the Canadian game. There's a fumble there, and there's another drop pass there. And I'll be really honest with you, I was like, man, you got to get rid of this kid. He can't handle the pressure. But no, head coach Richie Hall, he gave him time to develop. So if you're a young kid and you're going to the Edmonton Eskimos, I think you're going to have an opportunity to make a couple mistakes and flourish.
Danny Machoch has been busy. The Edmonton Eskimos offseason traded Maurice Mann to the Hamilton Tiger Cats as well for Chris Thompson. And now another selection coming for the Edmonton Eskimos after their trade with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And here it is. Here's Commissioner Mark Cohon.
With the 12th overall pick, the Edmonton Eskimos select Salim Borhat, defensive back from St. Mary's University. Calgary is now on the clock.
Well, we're going to get the inside story in just a second from our panel back there, a guy who knows him very well, Salim Borhat from St. Mary's University, Calgary, Alberta native, and you see the numbers from the E-Camp. Defensive back, Husky goes to the Edmonton Eskimos. Dwayne.
Salim Borhat is a guy who put himself on everybody's radar at the National Invitational Combine. A big DB, good speed, very good range. about 6'2", 6'3", a guy who can run about the 4'5" to 4'6" range. Nice fit in that free safety spot, but a player who has also spent some time playing corner, so different positions in that St. Mary's secondary for Steve Samara. Really about the only knock on this kid is, you know, has the coaching been good enough to get him to the next level?
Well, and we just happen to have the guy that might be able to answer that right over there. You can throw your BlackBerry at him or something. Tell us about this guy.
The biggest thing about Sal is he is a true free safety. When we recruited him out of the Okanagan Sun, he came in as a free safety. We put him there. He started in his first year. Second year, played free safety. In his third year, we struggled a bit at the boundary corner position. We moved him there. He showed that he had the ability to play lockdown. This past year, moved back to free safety, and it's great to see for him. He's a hard-working guy that he deserves this opportunity.
He's a guy that's kind of come onto the scene a little bit late. He didn't get invited to the E-Camp, but he got invited to the Dwayne Ford Camp. I know we call it the National Invitation Camp, but really it's the one that Dwayne put on, and really opened a lot of eyes in that situation.
Yeah, I think, you know, Sal always had the skill and the talent. A lot of teams didn't throw down the middle on us in the during the season. He was a menace back there. He would whack you. You know, he covers sideline to sideline with his rangy stride, and I think it hurt his stats a little bit.
Special teams, he'll get asked to do that right away. How good will he be there?
He can be a gunner for sure. You know, he can get down the field, he can shed a block, and he's not afraid to make a tackle.
And Rod, clearly, he does a pretty good job of getting past his coaching.
Well, that coach, by the way, was the CIS Coach of the Year last year, Steve Samara. Taking the shots already. See, that's,
wow. He's dying back there.
Goodness, we haven't even talked about three of you guys who have no hair back there yet. Anyway, we're going to get ready for the Calgary Stampeders selection, but let's talk about the Edmonton Eskimos. Brian Bulke gets selected earlier. They addressed some issues on defense with Bulke and also now Salim Borja.
Richie Hall's flexed his muscles on that defensive side of the football, making sure he's got some depth, quality depth there. And I think it's a good move, you know, but I also think that they've got to address in future picks their offensive line with only 7 offensive linemen, Canadian offensive linemen on that staff at this point. You know, on offensive linemen, our group that came together last year late, Schultz, you know, I really think solidified and really picked up the Edmonton Eskimos' chances of moving forward. And but they need some depth there, and I'd be surprised if they didn't look there.
You know, what's interesting, though, is, you know, we always joke with Glenn Suter because he was a free safety, and we say, you're so far off the line of scrimmage, what an easy job, and you never come up and you do anything, and we joke about it intensely until he says, hey, guys, that's enough. But the truth is, to play that position, you got to be really bright, because if you make one mistake, if you over-pursue, if you under-pursue, if you come up to the line of scrimmage too much, or you come back, and it is the quarterback position, so if you give him some time, again, to have the cerebral side mastered, I'm not saying that you're smart.
That's enough.
Okay.
That's enough.
Yeah, but they've got 3 safeties already. They've got Elliot Richardson.
That's why
they got Jason Nugent and Scott Gordon. Yeah,
I disagree. I'm really surprised with this pick.
Yeah.
I thought they would go in a different position, probably offensive line, because Elliot Richardson, I know Richie Hall is very happy with him. So a little bit of a surprise in this pick for me.
Well, maybe it's a poker play. Maybe there's something down the road that they're going to do. And there are compliments been going on around here.
Sarcastic ones.
I guess so. The Calgary Stampeders will select next, 13th overall, 6th in the second round. And already the Calgary Stampeders selected Rob Maver earlier. So he and Burke Dales now kicking duties in Calgary. Again, no Sandro DeAngelis. So clearly now maybe they go into the direction that you guys talked about earlier on their offensive line.
Yeah, you would think they'd have to, you know, with the departure of Pilon and Sumpas. You know, they picked up Rob Maver, and which now they've got a full dance card with Keene, Maver, and Dales there. But, you know, you look in the offensive line, and this is a huge void to fill right away, because Jeff Pilon he was a mainstay there in the offensive line, and Zumpas was so special this team to come in and be able to contribute so quickly, along with Jesse Newman. Now, I think that is the next place that this football team's got to look to get some help there.
They're going to miss Jeff Pilon. He was a warrior his whole career. They did sign Matt Sheridan, who's been out of football for a short period of time. Will get back into football, but there is an athletic difference, a technical demand that your offensive tackles that are completely different than your offensive guards. So can they find 5 bodies and maybe take a guard and put him to tackle? That may be their single biggest question going into the season.
Jermaine Copeland is no longer a Calgary Stampeder. Now, I know he's an American player, but the bottom line is, what's up with Ryan Thelwell right now? I mean, how healthy will he be? How long will he last in the regular season? You know, there are still some receivers available. You know, you want to get some targets for Henry Burris. Wouldn't be surprised to see if it was a receiver.
Yeah, Josh Bishop, Steve Turner, again, had those off-the-chart numbers.
That guy's, I want to see him in the Canadian Football League. I think he's, Stephen Turner, I think he's going to do some amazing things.
Stephen Afterburner Turner, they call him. We'll see if this is the guy right here. Here's Commissioner Mark Cohon.
With the 13th overall pick, the Stamps select Tareen Allen, defensive back from Wilfrid Laurier University, Montreal. You are now on the clock.
So not a receiver, but Tareen Allen projected to go very high, possibly even in the first round at Etobicoke, Ontario. And rated very well at the E-Camp. Wilfrid Laurier, first-team OUA All-Star. And to tell us more about Tareen Allen, here's Dwayne.
Well, Tareen Allen is a guy who has been a lockdown corner for the last 4 years, started from the time he was a freshman at Wilfrid Laurier University. The fastest defensive back in this draft. He's a 4-4 guy playing out in that spot. Typically, you see CFL teams wanting to convert their Canadian defensive backs to safety, but corner is going to be Tareen Allen's natural position. A terrific cover guy, not necessarily the most physical defensive back in this draft, but a guy who's going to be able to help out a little bit on some special teams, getting down the field at least.
Steph, you've seen this guy a lot since his freshman year, and I'm guessing you don't want to see him again.
I hope he sticks. I'm done trying to throw to that side of the field. It's under construction when he's there. So he takes out the best receiver on the short side and does it consistently week in and week out. The question mark is, can he be physical enough? And he hasn't had to. No one's catching balls against him. He doesn't play much teams. So that's what he's got to answer in the first few weeks of training camp. And I wish him luck because I don't want to see him anymore.
In terms of just pure athletic ability, what does this guy do well?
His pure speed is special, and he is a smooth runner and finds the football well. To get separation, you don't keep it. He closes quick and makes plays on the football. He's a true cover guy, and he'll have to transition to be a bit of a cover guy and a tackler and a special teamer if he wants to play in the CFL.
Dwayne, how much of this is a trend now with defensive backs getting picked? We haven't seen much yet.
Well, this isn't a position where you necessarily expect to see a run happen. The defensive back position isn't a spot where you see a lot of Canadian players in the CFL, like receiver or offensive line, where you might get a run once that one guy goes. But the trend that I see happening here is teams reversing their strategies and having it work out. Tareen Allen's name was the one most commonly associated with the Calgary Stampeders in the first round, and the thought was they'd go after Maver in the second. They flipped things around, and like BC earlier, they get the two guys they wanted.
Davis Sanchez is the only Canadian corner in the CFL right now. Tareen Allen could be next. Coming up next, the Montreal Alouettes with back-to-back kids. They've been known to go off the board. We'll see what they do after this.
Sports Center, this is top 10. This is highlight of the night. Have you seen a better catch than that? Shea Emery strips Martell Mallett.
Come see your Grey Cup champion Alouettes in your brand new stadium. Have you got your tickets for the 2010 season? Contact the Alouettes ticket office now at 514-871-2255 or visit MontrealAlouettes.com today.
Getting close to the end of the second round, and of course all of the coverage on tsn.ca and cfl.ca for the final 4 rounds. And the Montreal Alouettes will have the next 2 selections, 14 and 15 here in this second round. And right now, there are a number of players that are still on the board that are available. I know one name pops out for you.
It really does. You know, I look at Ben Cahoon. We've talked about how Ben Cahoon is getting later on in his career. He's still a great football player, but Stephen Turner has not been selected yet, and I know he's going to get a look in Chicago. But here's a guy who ran a 4.31 at the evaluation camp, and you know how impressive those stats can be for a lot of coaches and how tempting it is, but obviously there's more to it, and he is getting a look in Chicago. I'm just surprised that he's still available.
Yeah, and you know, I thought Toronto would have picked him up. You know, they lost Dominic Dorsey, but you know, they got Andre Dury, and who's fabulous, and he's going to be their main guy. I thought Toronto would have picked him up and used him in returns and also as a receiver as well. But I can certainly see Montreal possibly, you know, picking up some depth there behind, like you say, Ben Cahoon.
He has great explosive acceleration. That's not something you can teach at all. You're gifted with it.
It's kind of funny how we sit around here and every year there is one player or a couple of players that their stock kind of drops for whatever reason. And maybe Montreal, again, with 2 selections back-to-back here. Let's go to Commissioner Mark Cohon now.
With the 14th overall pick, the Owls select Chima Ikwoba, defensive end from Wilfrid Laurier University. Montreal, you are still on the clock.
Back-to-back Hawks here. Tareen Allen, then Chima Ikwoba from Wilfrid Laurier out of Burlington, Ontario, 6'3", 260, and also another one of those players with the word futures attached because he did attend and accepted an invitation to the Detroit Lions rookie minicamp. With more, here's Dwayne Ford.
Well, Chima Ikwoba is a guy who's received mixed reviews leading up to this draft. Most people consider him to be one of the best athletes in this draft, and certainly far and away the best athlete amongst the defensive linemen. The question regarding him has always been as how that translates as a football player and into those football instincts. But the bottom line, far and away the best athlete among the defensive linemen, a guy who, in terms of that, his movement, his strength, and so on, is going to be able to compete at the next level.
Steph, you saw plenty of him. Does he play every play?
He does. His real strength is running things down from behind. It's a great football family. I had the privilege of coaching his older brother, Agona. Funny story about Chima, his first CIS play, it started as a true freshman. We had a toss called, and his brother had the crack back on the defensive end, and he welcomed the younger guy to the league by knocking him on his butt. To his credit, he's really bought into the Laurier Strength and Conditioning Program, the product of 4 hard years, and as you say, he is testing and physically ready to go.
What's his upside like? I mean, as a freshman, this guy played right away. He made a big impact early on in his career. He's down there trying out with Detroit. How good can he be?
His range is outstanding. He gets in the passing lanes. He's lanky. He's tall. It's the physicalness. Can he take on a charging fullback? Can he play with the explosiveness and the physicality that he'll need to play at the next level? A great kid, coachable, football family, as I said earlier. They'll be happy with his work ethic and once they have him in camp.
Dwayne, what are the Chargers, or what are the Lions looking for right now in Detroit as they look at him at minicamp?
Well, the biggest thing you see is those testing numbers. Obviously, a guy who you look at the numbers and you see tremendous potential, and that's what NFL teams look for when they bring in these CIS kids. They're not necessarily looking at guys who are going to be ready to go right away, but you think of a guy like Samuel Giguère a couple years ago. You look at the CIS kids this year, someone like Joel Reinders getting down there as well. What they see is tremendous potential, and that's what this guy is. Fantastic frame, fantastic athletic ability. The running line on him was the Canadian Cam Wake.
One CFL coach said to me he does things at that size that you simply shouldn't be able to do, and the easy comparison was Israel Adonijah, who's had a fairly good NFL career to this point. If he can get it together, they may not see him, but if you're Montreal, you can take the risk.
Yeah, Israel Adonijah out of Brandon, Manitoba, of course, played with the Bisons and then went to the Chicago Bears. Stephen Turner still on the board. He's going to be attending the Bears minicamp. Some of those future players we talked about, another guy out there is Joel Reinders, who still is available. Montreal back-to-back here. What's the thinking?
Yeah, that an offensive line would probably one that they have to consider when you think about that line is aging a little bit. I know it's got a few more years left in it, but when you look at what Jim Popp has done over the last few years with the draft, he's a guy who drafts for the potential of the player and what's going to happen in year 2 and year 3. And when you're a team that's been as successful as the Montreal Alouettes guys over the last few years, how do you question? I mean, that's exactly the luxury that this team has and Jim Popp has, because they are so solid. They are such a good football team. They can look at 2 years down the road.
And they can't, because they have depth at that position. 5 defensive ends on that staff right now. So, I think this is something that they can afford to do. And I'm surprised that, of this move, Schulte, because having that depth, and having the availability of a strong pool of talent, and to get, I would have thought they'd gone somebody to get on the field today.
One of the arguments all of us had is who has the best 2 defensive ends in the Canadian Football League? Was it John Chick and Stevie Baggs? Or was Bauman and Anwar Stewart? We went back and forth. Now, you have a young kid who can look at the 2 defensive ends that Montreal presently has, and coaches coach, they absolutely do, but players coach a little bit too. And he's going to look at that film and the technique that those defensive ends use, and I think he's in a perfect situation because of the veterans on that team.
So we have the final selection of the second round. That is all of our coverage on TSN, but keep in mind there are 6 rounds, and some of those players we've talked about before who have seen their stock fall likely will be chosen, and sometimes it doesn't matter where you're chosen, but the fact that you are chosen. So now with the 15th selection overall and the last selection of the second round for the Montreal Alouettes, here again is Marco on.
Thank you, Rod, and the entire panel. It was a great day today. With the 15th and final pick in the second round, the Montreal Alouettes pick Curtis Duplanko, linebacker from North Dakota University.
Another NC2A player goes. Have not seen a lot of NC2A players as we had talked about, and we've seen in previous drafts in the first 2 rounds, but out of North Dakota, Thorsby, Alberta, his hometown, 59 tackles, 2 sacks in 09, and named to the NCC's Commissioner's Academic Honor Roll. Good player, smart guy, Dwayne Ford.
Curtis Duplanko, a guy who really flew under the radar until this season. Had spent time first of all as a redshirt at North Dakota, spent some time on the offensive side of the ball as a fullback. Once he got an opportunity to get into that starting lineup at linebacker, he made an immediate impact. Duplanko was voted by his coaches as the top defensive player for the Fighting Sioux this season. So a very good football player, a guy who's going to be a true middle linebacker, good size. And when you hear about a guy who has that versatility, having played some fullback, having played some linebacker, you also think this is a linebacker who's going to be able to come in and contribute on special teams. But again, he is a redshirt. He's a year away.
Now, if you're Montreal, you start a middle linebacker in Shea Emery, so you want a guy that can back him up and be a legitimate backup without a big drop-off. Is he that guy?
He certainly has the potential to be that guy, and that's why you look at a Curtis Duplanko in this spot, exactly as you mentioned, the way they deploy the ratio using a Canadian middle linebacker. He's, in most books, considered the number 4 linebacker on a lot of people's boards, but we see him move up a little bit here, and he's a guy I know Montreal really liked.
One of those guys is Josh Jesse, who was rated the number 3 linebacker on most boards. A Quebec guy, speaks French, everything like that, and can certainly play, although he's coming off an injury. As we look at your top 10 here, he's still there. Why not go in that direction?
Well, there's some concern about Josh Jesse because he's coming back from knee surgery. His season was ended by that knee injury. He did come back and worked out for teams and put in pretty good numbers a couple of weeks ago, especially considering that he really isn't back to 100%. But I know some people held off because you question, well, is he going to be able to get through training camp because there's still some swelling in that knee? And on a different note, I know one concern that people had about Josh Jesse, who's certainly a bilingual player, but French is his first language. And teams talk about as a middle linebacker guy who has to communicate a lot of calls to the defense. And some people wondered whether that would be an issue as a rookie coming in.
Well, guys, that's it for us as we send it back for the 3rd through 6th rounds. Gentlemen, I want to thank you. Steve Samara, Steph Potasic, Dwayne Ford, as always. Thanks so much for doing this, guys. Thank you. All right. Rod, back to you.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks to our panel and the Argos draft room busy. Again, looking ahead to the future, some big picks already. The draft will continue for the next 4 hours. Well, 2 hours that flew by. All began with Shamari Williams, linebacker out of Queens, taken by the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Joe Appel, Corey Greenwood, Rob Maber. Kicker goes to Calgary. Brian Bulkey, Christian Matt to Montreal. 47 players will be selected today. Again, Hamilton had forfeited a pick because of last year's supplemental draft in the first round. Here's the second round, and we saw the receivers go 1, 2, 3 in the second round. Cisco, Watson, and Gore. Curtis Duplanko, the final pick in the second round. We can also tell you that Josh Jesse has just gone to the BC Lions and John Bender to the Calgary Stampeders. The draft continues throughout the afternoon. You can log on to CFL.ca or TSN.ca to see where some of your favorites are. And I know there's a lot of alumni out there and a lot of university kids who like to see where they're, and family and friends. And you know, it's not about the number where you're picked. You still got to go to training camp. Yeah. You still got a long way to show that, hey, I'm a CFL player.
Just get into training camp. But, you know, I want to tip of the hat to the CIS coaches. I really believe that at evaluation camp, how impressive the athletes were, how prepared they are. I think of our two panelists, of course, but also Leroy Blue and Bishops, Brian Towers at the U of S. I'll tell you what, the coaching in the CIS guys is improving all the time, and you can really see it in how well prepared these athletes are. So a tip of the hat to CIS coaching.
Yeah, and Blackie, picking up on what you're talking about, you know, I wasn't drafted. You know, and whether you're 48th or number 1 or you're undrafted and you get an invitation to camp, you know, go there and be a football player, train your butt off and make your dreams happen. And a lot of dreams are coming to true. And just the beginning for these athletes on this great day. And a lot of draft yet to come. And it's interesting to see how all teams continue to build their Canadian talent in different ways across this league with such great talent. Should be interesting to watch the rest of this on TSN.ca.
Well, you know, I really feel for the players that haven't been drafted yet. I know you're going through a lot of anxiety, but also remember, Dave Stalo was a 6th-round draft choice, and he has now established himself with the Hamlin Ticats, and we were all talking about it earlier. Rob Bagg, he is a receiver for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He was not drafted. He was a free agent. He's caught 81 passes. He's signed a contract extension. Dreams do come true.
Open the door.
Open the door.
Get on the field. Can't wait. Yeah, can't wait to get it started again, guys. Thanks so much. Month away from training camp, 2 months away from Canada Day and the season opener. Corey Greenwood goes number 3 overall to the Argos, who also took Joe Appel with his 2nd selection, Shamari Williams from Queens, king of the 2010 CFL draft.